What if Palpatine had a Persona 5 palace? Sheev Palpatine definitely fits the profile of the kind of person the Phantom Thieves would go after. Yet what kind of palace would he have, and how would it be conquered? Well, to figure that out, we need to do a deep dive into his character, how he views the world, and what his greatest fears and insecurities are, and how they feed into his distorted obsessions. Only then can we know how it would translate into a palace and how it would operate. So without further ado, let's enter the heart of Palpatine. Sheev Palpatine at his core is a man who possesses all the signs of psychopathy. And I say possess because he does not suffer from this condition, he revels in it. The most prevalent evidence of this is his extreme sadism when torturing his enemies with Force lightning, and how he slowly draws Anakin Skywalker into his web of deceit. Which brings up another of Palpatine's notable traits. He's a skilled manipulator who lies as easily as he breathes. Even when he does speak the truth, it's all part of a larger deception he's trying to catch you in. Even when he does speak the truth, it's all part of a larger deception. So now that we know all of Palpatine's evils, we can ask, what distorted desires drive his actions? Well, as Palpatine himself says in Revenge of the Sith, it drives everything Palpatine does, both in the political sphere and in his study of the Force. Yet ironically enough, both pursuits leave him empty and craving more. In Legends, once he established his empire, he left most of the actual governing to his council and his Grand Moffs, as he found the task cumbersome and unfulfilling. So instead, he focused on expanding the empire to conquer more, as that's what he excelled at. Conquering his enemies gave him joy, but just like any high, it soon faded, and he either needed to conquer more or torment other subjugated species to feel any kind of satisfaction. In a similar vein with the dark side, he gained immense power, yet he was never able to gain the one thing he truly wanted: eternal life, which again, ironically enough, the Jedi gained from a certain point of view. So all Palpatine can do is gain more power to compensate. So now that we've established all this, we can deduce that Palpatine's palace would combine his deceptive nature, his sadism, and his greatest fear. So Palpatine's palace would likely be a power plant in place of the Imperial Palace on Coruscant. Within said power plant would be a labyrinth full of false starts, dead ends, traps, false exits, and monsters to reflect his endlessly deceptive nature. The monsters within his palace would be adept at causing enemies to go berserk or become confused and attack their allies, which represents Palpatine's mastery at making people give in to their hatred and turn against others. At the center of the labyrinth would be the main generator for his unlimited power. A generator that's fueled by the pain and suffering of everyone he's hurt, with his rule reflecting how the dark side of the Force is powered. For how he would see his subjects, if any were present, he'd see them all as cattle or cash cows for the suffering and pain he can extract from them, and even his most valued Grand Moffs and Grand Admirals would be little more than prized droids to him, hard to replace, but ultimately expendable if he so wished. For what his treasure would be, it would ironically enough be his crimson lightsaber, as even though Palpatine personally detests them, it is still the most recognizable symbol of the Sith, and the promise of unlimited power that he murdered his family for. So now that we understand that, we can get to the two biggest questions. What would his shadow look like, and how would Palpatine react to his treasure being stolen? Well, for Palpatine's shadow, we get to what has to be the greatest irony of them all: that Palpatine's shadow would actually be a decent man who would help the Phantom Thieves find the treasure and likely surrender it to them without a fight. Now, before you run to the comments and tell me that's not how Persona works, hear me out. According to Carl Jung, whose work Persona is based on, the shadow isn't inherently evil. What it is a culmination of everything that we've deemed unacceptable about ourselves. A prime example of a shadow not being evil is the shadow of Futaba Sakura, as her shadow represented her refusal to accept guilt for things she wasn't responsible for, and the knowledge that her mother loved her and didn't see her as a burden. All things that Futaba suppressed when her mother's fake suicide note was read aloud to her. So going from that, let's ask ourselves, what would Palpatine find unacceptable about himself? Someone who, unlike his apprentices, embraces the dark side wholeheartedly and doesn't bother hiding his evil. What would he hide away about himself? The answer: any redeeming qualities, such as compassion or guilt, no matter how little of those things he actually had, as such things are weaknesses to the Sith. And for a man whose life revolves around betrayal, it truly would be the most poetic thing ever, that he'd even betray himself at the first possible opportunity. And that brings us to the final question: how would Palpatine react to his palace's destruction? Well, him breaking down and admitting his crimes is very unlikely, so what would likely happen instead, if his desires for unlimited power was lost, is that he'd be forced to confront his own hollowness. A void he desperately wants to fill but never can, and now his main coping mechanism of gaining more power is gone. So just like an addict that can no longer self-medicate, he'd suffer a total breakdown and be unable to focus enough to use the Force. Thus, the once mighty Sith Lord would be reduced to a powerless old man, who would now live in utter terror of anyone, especially his apprentice, finding out about his new state. And that would truly be the worst kind of punishment for a man like Palpatine, to be like an artist gone blind, a composer gone deaf, to forever remember the power you used to have, and for it to be forever beyond your grasp till your last day.